Hello, friends, and welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is Kristin Cary hosting today, and very excited to interview Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. Matthew and Joanna, thank you so much for being here on the Living Truth Podcast with me today.
So great to be here. We're super excited.
Yeah, wonderful to be back.
Yeah, you guys, I have interviewed Matthew and Joanna 2 other times, and we will probably refer, especially the intimacy pyramid, which they helped develop with Dan Drake. It's a great tool for people navigating the struggles with unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal and trying to rebuild a marriage. We also did an episode about emotional regulation. That was really awesome. Okay, so here's what you guys need to know about Matthew and Joanna. They are a dynamic duo of coaching and therapy and like working together as a team with men and women with unwanted sexual behavior and their betrayed spouses. And their real heartbeat is for the coupleship, right? I mean, you guys work with individuals, but this is part of your story, and that's part of what I appreciate about your work and your perspective so much is you're not just coming at this from a clinical perspective. You're coming at this from the perspective of we have been in the trenches and we know what the work is like to rebuild a marriage after betrayal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're still doing the work, so
Never stops.
So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about the topic of sexual intimacy after betrayal. Can you tell me why this topic is so important to the two of you?
I think, as you mentioned before, the coupleship is really foundational to our work. We're big believers in the power of relationships in terms of what they can do both inside of themselves for each individual, but also what they can do outside of themselves. I think when you find a really healthy relationship, you always see that it's generative, it creates life. And part of the design of marriage is for life to be generated through physical intimacy. When we have the basics understanding of life, like in children and procreation, but even if that's not the purpose, there's other life that's created, and sexual intimacy has such a vital role in that. While not required for healthy relationships, it's just one of the pieces that God has given us to create great connection and to sustain that connection over time. And so many of us never really got a great education around that, if we got any education at all. And so for every couple we found, there's usually a lack of knowledge, but especially for couples that have been impacted so deeply by unwanted sexual behavior, addiction, even betrayal. This issue really matters for them. It's really important, and it stays important through the rest of their relationship.
And I think it's so hard for couples recovering from any kind of sexual infidelity, sexual betrayal, sometimes imagine having a healthy sex life again. Sometimes it feels like that may be a piece that's lost in what has happened and in the trauma. And so I think, professionally, our hope for our clients, but also personally, right? Our goal in our own journey of recovery was like, if we're going to put in all this hard work and effort to save this relationship, it's not so we can kind of like limp along or survive. We really want to thrive. And we want that holistic intimacy on the other side that includes emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual intimacy, right? All of those different pieces. And so we didn't feel like we had to lose any of that because of our story and what's happened. And so figuring out like, okay, what does that look like? And how do we learn, and how do we help our clients learn how to talk about sexuality in really healthy ways, right? A lot of recovery is learning the unhealthy way sexuality is practiced. And but there also needs to be relearning of what healthy sexuality looks like for that couple.
Yeah.
Why don't you unpack that a little bit? What is healthy sexuality?
Such a great question.
That's a tough one. I think, healthy sexuality, as we said, it's a couple of things. I think it's not self-seeking. So when sex becomes the thing, that's when we fall into idolatry, right? It becomes the thing that we're after. Sexual intimacy is about what it does for the relationship and for the individuals that are a part of that relationship. And so good sex builds all three of those things. It should build up each individual, and it should build up the relationship. And so any sex that doesn't do one of those things, so if it's good for me but it's harmful for my partner and harmful for the relationship, it can't be good sex. right? And so that's really what we're focusing on, is how do we learn how to have any physical intimacy, and that can include pre-intercourse, right? Intercourse, physical intimacy is a big encompassing category. And so how do we develop a robust kind of system of physical engagement and physical intimacy that builds those three things? That's when we know it's good sex, right? Healthy sexuality.
Yeah, and I think one of the characteristics of it that really jumps out at us, and when we talk about it, we really highlight, is the idea of generosity. Our experience of our sexuality together, it should be a generous act, not a self-serving act. And so thinking about that just really kind of changes the way we approach our sexual relationship together when that's the goal. And so changes a lot of aspects of that. So yeah, that's another piece.
Thanks, guys. So I imagine there's a lot of people that are listening to this episode, and they're early in their journey. They're information seeking, whether it's a betrayed partner or somebody with unwanted sexual behavior. And I know a lot of people struggling with the unwanted sexual behavior may really want sex to happen sooner rather than later because it feels like a connection, like a genuine connection. And then there's some betrayed partners. I mean, there's obviously the whole spectrum of how people respond with betrayal. There are some betrayed partners that want to secure that sexual contact with their spouse, that connection, because they don't feel like they have any other form of connection, or it can feel um like an almost like a false reassurance that we're going to be okay, or at least for 5 minutes we're okay, right? So
Right.
this is a tricky topic, and I do want to just say to our listeners, if this topic is triggering to you, with it, don't be shocked that this topic is just overwhelming and maybe you're not ready for it yet.
Yeah.
But what would you guys say to those men and women who are listening to this and they're early in the journey, and either they're thinking, no way, I can't do that because I'm traumatized, or they're thinking, come on, when can we do this quickly? I tend to think more, it's usually the person with the unwanted sexual behavior that's like, let's go for this right now. When can we reintegrate sex? And more often than not, the betrayed partner in a traumatized state may not be ready. But how would you guys encourage or approach our listeners who are in those early phases?
Yeah. I think one of the things we like to remind people, it's very rarely what you do, it's how you do it. And so we get this question a lot, when should we re-engage sexually? Or if I want it, and we'll get from partners, right? I would like to be intimate with him because there may be new ways that he's beginning to open up emotionally to me. He's sharing things he's never shared before. And now all of a sudden I'm feeling connected to him. And I would like to be, am I bad for wanting sex? Am I going to trigger his addiction? And we think those are all good questions. The answer is usually found in how do we go about the process. And that's what we have found to be most helpful for individuals in the relationship, is to make sure that you have a healthy process and to know that that process is going to take time. One of the reasons that we created the intimacy pyramid is because we wanted to give a simple framework for people to understand a general process to move towards really intimate acts. And of course, sexual intimacy, right? It's usually what we think of when we think of intimacy. And that's an act that requires a lot to be right. And so we just want to have a really good process. So we actually use the intimacy pyramid when we're coaching our clients to think about their sexual journey. And regardless of where they are in terms of level of engagement, we would still say we want you to start in this place of honesty, which early on is usually going to look like talking about what's happened. We've got to talk about what's happened. As someone who brought an addiction into this marriage, part of my honesty is to recognize how that addiction shaped me. I know that every time I practiced pornography, I was practicing sex based on the idea that sex is what I want, when I want it, how I want it, with who I want. Those are the almost exact opposites of marital, right? Sexual engagement. That, Joanna was talking about, right? Sexual engagement within a marriage is designed to be generous. Pornography is the opposite of generosity. And so I recognize, because of that habitual practice of the use of pornography, I was bringing that perspective in to our physical engagement. And so I needed to name that. I needed to understand that. I needed to explore that if I had any hopes of creating something really special between the two of us.
Yeah, so we'll actually, have a couple talk through, communicate together, like what are the narratives of sexuality that I brought into this relationship, right? Get honest about both of our stories. What is my understanding of sex, sexuality, what it's supposed to look like in marriage? Because oftentimes both parties had really unhealthy narratives coming in. And so starting to understand that, starting to understand our own unhealthy cycle in our relationship in terms of our sexual experience together, right? So that honesty phase is kind of like, let's get real. Let's get honest, right? About where we've been, what we've done, what this has looked like. Then that safety stage, right? As we move up the pyramid, safety is about now building in new understandings of what healthy is going to look like. We have to align in terms of our values and our goals around our sexual experience. We have to go, okay, if that was the unhealthy pattern or cycle, what does healthy look like? And a big piece of that will be learning to engage sexually from a place of regulation. I know we've talked, right? We've talked about self-regulation before. And so I love, right? Oftentimes the unhealthy ways we've experienced sexuality included dysregulation. If I'm feeling unsafe, insecure as a partner, I feel like he'll stay sober if I'm sexual with him, right? So I'm trying to control and manage his sobriety by engaging with him, right? That's not a healthy way of experiencing sexuality, right? Or if I'm feeling unwanted or distant, okay, well, I can change how I'm feeling by feeling close and connected through sexual experiences, right? We would say, no, that's not generous sexuality. That's me needing our sexual experience to fill some emotional need in myself that I'm not making well, right? And so talking through that safety, so that would be that safety stage of let's get really clear about that. Let's get clear about how regulation plays into creating safety when we're going to engage intimately through sex.
Well, and honesty and safety also found at a foundational level is I'm being honest about my acting out behaviors, right? If I'm the one with the unwanted sexual behavior, I've come forward. If the partner wants a full therapeutic disclosure, I've done that.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm
100%.
being forthcoming about where am I
100%.
at with this covenant? Am I only sexual with you, or am I acting out?
Yeah.
And then safety also would involve the maintaining of that covenant. Like there's no secrets happening in my sexual life in order to enter into a safe and healthy relationship with my spouse.
Absolutely. And we usually tell couples in terms of that pyramid journey, you're usually a step or two ahead emotionally in terms of building, right? And so we would expect a couple before they start reintegrating sexually through honesty and safety that you're already building trust emotionally. You're already able to be vulnerable emotionally. Does that kind of make sense? So you're kind of like
Yes.
a little bit ahead in your relational road emotionally before you're kind of engaging that sexual relationship.
And if I'm in my addiction, or if I'm still withholding information from my partner, I'm not in honesty and safety. I'm not even on the pyramid. We kind of call it pre-recovery.
It's off the table.
I'm off the table.
You're fine.
And this is hard because I know there are some people who do not have always kind of a direct sobriety journey. Sometimes it takes them a period of time, but it's recognizing I know where I'm at personally right now. So that's going to affect what I can do relationally. And if I am in a place of using sex to medicate emotions, then that's going to include sex outside of the marriage. It will also include usually sex within the marriage. A lot of times when I'm coaching the guys that I work with, we will identify where sex has been used within the marriage to medicate emotions, either through demands or through avoidance. In our relationship, I tended to be sexually avoidant out of shame. When I would think about my acting out, I would be ashamed. And so I would pull away from Joanna, which was very confusing for her because she didn't understand, right, what was going on while I was pulling away. And so I had to recognize that's one of the ways that my addiction, my problematic sexual behavior engaged, right, our relationship, which was also became one of the ways that I had to restore safety I had the opportunity to restore safety and trust in our relationship by knowing that I, in my recovery, became more engaging, more initiative around sexuality, as a way to demonstrate this is what the healthy version of me looks like. This is the version of me that you chose, the version of me that you know, and I am bringing that version into the relationship now as we exist in a different place.
I love that you bring that up, Matthew, because I think that many partners wonder, why is he not, if the partner is a female, and listeners, if your situation is flipped and the woman is the one with the sexual addiction and the man is the betrayed, just to use the pronouns that fit for you. But in this case, like Joanna, I assume you felt like, why am I not enough? Or at some point, you probably struggled with feeling rejected or confused. Yeah, Matthew,
It's
say
super
confused.
confusing, especially because, right, our early relationship was very different and then it would change and I couldn't pinpoint like why the changes, right? When you don't have all the information, you're trying to fill in these gaps and it doesn't really make sense, right? And we would even have conversations about it and there were excuses made that didn't quite make sense still. And I could feel myself starting to just shut off from the relationship in some ways because it didn't feel like this is a way we can experience reliable connection. We talk a lot about, right, safety is through reliability, and so when I
Ooh,
don't have
that's so important. Say that again.
safety is through reliability, and so when I don't have that reliable connection between us, I do not feel safe, and I'm going to start to shut down. I'm going to start to distance. And so I started being less and less even emotionally vulnerable in our relationship because there was a lack of safety. There's a lack of reliability there.
And I think it's good for listeners to know, psychologically speaking, all the research tells us that reliability requires a percentage of 90 and above. So reliability is not half the time.
Yeah.
Reliability is almost every time. That's reliable. And so this is why I think people don't understand they're having difficulty connecting, because if you can imagine, even if we just made this non-sexual, if we have a conversation and half the time it ends up in an argument, that situation will not feel reliable to us and we will want to avoid it naturally. We'll pull away from it and kind of keep it off the table. And so if sexual engagement, if one of us initiating sexually half the time goes awry, our bodies are going to start to tell us, no, sexual initiatives, those are dangerous things. So we start to pull away. So rebuilding really requires a high level of intentionality and success. We have to work really hard creating really healthy structures early on that allow us to gain the freedom of success. I think everyone assumes that, oh, because we're married, we're going to fall into this naturally. And we like to remind couples, there's a lot of structures early on that kind of keep us from making mistakes. They're like they're kind of like those training wheels, those guardrails, right? It's going to keep us where we need to be so that we can have enough success.
Yes.
That success is going to build trust, which allows for more freedom. I think what people kind of struggle with sometimes is they think, okay, it's sex, everything has to be free. Everything has to be on the table.
Or they see the guardrails and think, that's our future forever. And that sounds miserable, right?
Tell me more about the guardrails that you recommend.
Yeah, I mean, those can be a lot of different things,
Yeah.
but like I said, part of it's knowing our past.
Yeah.
If I know that I have engaged sexually from a place of maybe feeling like incapable or alone, and so and I drive from kind of a place of neediness, and so I pursue my partner that way, and they can kind of sense it, that this isn't about us, this is about you wanting to feel something.
Yeah.
Well, the guardrail would be is that I'm going to check in with myself emotionally anytime I engage sexually with my partner. And I'm going to just make sure that I'm in that place of truth. I'm in that truth that says, hey, you know what? I know that I am lovable. I am a child of God. I know that I'm created and wonderfully made. And it's out of that and out of that connection to my partner that I want to express a healthy desire, right? Then I may say, hey, I am noticing our connection and my desire for you. Would you be open to engaging with me physically?
Yeah, another example would be for partners, right? It's really normal when they start to re-engage sexually that they're going to have triggers, that things are going to come up during that sexual experience. And going, an example of a structure or guardrail would be you don't just keep trying to like force having sex together as those triggers are coming up, right? You name it, you stop, you guys
In the moment.
in the moment, right?
Mhm.
Because that dysregulation is taken over. You're in fight or flight. You're not fully present and connected, right? And it's not going to be good for your body to force yourself to continue that active intimacy if you're not feeling safe. There's a lot of issues with that. And you're going to actually create a really negative experience in your body if you do that, which is going to make it harder to create a healthy sexual experience moving forward. So going, okay, we need to stop in that moment. We need to create a structure for what we do in that moment, right? We want it all planned out in advance. So the couple knows exactly how to handle that moment and how to handle it well. And so that it just guarantees that they have healthy, safe, reliable experiences of their sexuality moving forward, accounting for their history, their past, and what may come up.
Well, I think triggers for the betrayed partner are so common. So I would love for you guys to unpack that experience that you would recommend to your clients of what to do when the betrayed partner experiences a trigger while being intimate sexually.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think one of the things is to remember that that is also a part of your sexual intimacy, right? It is all, everything that's going on emotionally with you is a part of this greater thing, and these are all intertwined. So we like to talk about this holistic intimacy. I don't step out of physical intimacy and engage emotional. We're doing it all in the same time. And so part of some of the things I will coach when I'm coaching with guys is saying, hey, this is part of your intimacy now. It's going to be reflective of each other's emotions. And you probably both have deep emotions around your sexual intimacy because it's a very vulnerable act. It is a nakedness, right? I'm getting exposed, right? I'm getting accepted. I'm offering myself. There's a lot of vulnerability there. So recognizing that and really just slowing down and honoring where each of you are at. And I think when someone's triggered, the best thing we can do is really hear where they're at and see the validity of their experience. What people desire most is to not be alone in their pain. No one likes being in pain, but people hate more being alone in their pain. What they would like is someone who is close to them and who cares about them to get it. If I can get what my partner's going through and not just kind of name it academically, but actually like get it and kind of feel it with them. We'll use this word like attunement. Like if I can kind of be with them in that same emotional space, that is incredibly powerful. And that's almost intimacy in itself. The ability just to be in that same space emotionally and say, okay, I see where you're at, right? I think it makes absolute sense that you're wondering right now whether I'm fully present because we have a history of me engaging sexually and my mind being elsewhere, right? If that's part of our past. And so for you to be worried about that right now, to be wondering, that makes total sense, right? I'm here with you and I want to be able to talk about this, right? What would you like to know, right? And so that ability to validate someone and give them some choices of, hey, what would be most helpful is going to open up the door to a healing experience, even if it doesn't include any more physical intimacy, right? Because the couple may move forward and decide, you know what, that's enough for now. What would be really nice is maybe we're going to hold hands, we're going to talk, we're going to make this a different type of intimate experience, and that's okay, right? Or as the conversation unfolds, the partner, may say, hey, I'm in a different place. I think I'd like to try to be intimate again. I think this feels really good and I'd like to go on from a place. But I do think it starts with that validation.
And I think that, that figuring out your values, your goals around sexuality is really helpful for those moments, because if our goal is generosity and nurturing our relationship, we can do that in a whole host of ways. And the way it needs to look in this moment can change dramatically depending on what's going on in that moment, right? And so, like Matthew's saying, not seeing as like, oh, even we're losing out on intimacy or we're shifting our focus or anything like that. No, it's all the same experience. It's all caring for our relationship in the way it needs right now. And so being willing to pivot and figure out what that is, like he's saying, that validation, that empathy, and then kind of affirming what that partner needs. It may be I need to take a break. It may mean I need some space. It might be I need us to connect, but in a different way. Can we connect in a different way right now? Right. But really learning to, for the partner, learning to get in touch with their needs, right? It takes self-awareness to be able to know what I need in that moment, to be able to communicate that assertively, and then for that partner to be able to receive and honor that, right? So it is really this kind of relational dance in that moment, being able to go through that well.
And what you guys are describing is so beautiful. And I just want our listeners to know, like, pulling this all off is not something you can actually pull off. And if here's what I mean. Here's what I mean. I'm not saying it's hopeless. I'm just saying, like, what Matthew and Joanna are describing, I'm like completely vibing and tracking with it, and it's great. But like, if you're in the trenches of dealing with this right now, dear listener, and you're like, what? How? How? Know that it doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process, as the Raabsmiths have said. And that it is like peeling layers of an onion in terms of like the depth to which we can show empathy for one another rather than triggering each other, because that's a thing, right? One person gets triggered and we trigger each other. We ping, 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 right? So friends, take some deep breaths right now. What you guys are describing is so beautiful. And I do want to give our listeners hope that like this is a journey worth working at. But if you are on the journey and your spouse is not willing to have the humility and the perseverance and the emotional maturity to continue on this journey, it's not necessarily because there's something wrong with you, friends. Right? This is tough work, but it is what you guys are describing is absolutely beautiful. Friends, we're going to take a break on this topic this week, and we will revisit sexual intimacy after betrayal with Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith in 2 weeks when the next episode of the Living Truth podcast releases. Thank you for joining me. Take good care of yourself, knowing that this topic can be overwhelming and triggering, but it is not without hope. There is always hope with God. He can give us what we need if we are willing to do the hard, brave, courageous work of recovery. And until next time, I am holding out hope for you.